Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Feel free to take your phones off mute or your devices off mute. Let us hear your voices.
Good afternoon.
How we doing, my man? You've made your move, Evan? I guess maybe you didn't hear me. Hey, May, how are you? I don't know if you're trying to say something, May. You got your hand raised. You can take your phone off mute if you like.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Sorry, I couldn't unmute for some reason, but now I can.
Okay. Evan, you made your trip to North Carolina, you right? You're there? You're raising your hand, but you're not coming off mute. Is anybody else struggling with coming off mute? Give it a little practice.
Okay, now it's working. Apparently, it doesn't really seem to seamlessly switch back and forth.
All right.
Because it says the host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves.
Yeah, we had that happen last time. Deb, is there a way we can clear that up for everybody?
And it also says the chat is disabled.
Yeah, that happened.
It
too.
did. Okay, give me a minute, guys. But go ahead, Brian, do the introduction and I'll get everything going here.
All right. So guys, thank you for joining in with us here on another Wednesday night session. 2 weeks ago, we had a session around how to obtain an internship. And so tonight, we wanted to continue the internship dialogue, but now we have two wonderful panelists with us tonight who are going to help us understand the power of the internship, how to leverage the internship, how to navigate that experience, either it be over a summer or over a semester, and some may use the term a co-op. So that's what tonight is about. We have two wonderful guests, Alissa and Dr. De Jesus, who will be our panelists and providing things from their perspectives. So I'll start it off with a few questions for them, but then we really would appreciate your feedback, your questions, and leverage their experiences. We have a first internship experience versus a person who's done multiple internships and a little more advanced. And then I'll always be in the background and can add any context to anything that you guys need, as I've done many myself and has benefited me greatly. So before we get started, do we have anyone that wants to share something positive that has happened since the last time we talked? And hopefully the feature works for you to come off of mute now. And you could use the raise your hand feature if you like. Evan, I see you still have your hand up if you were wanting to speak.
Yeah, I can speak. Can you repeat that? I had to call for a quick second.
Oh, we're just doing our normal something positive.
Oh, positive. I passed my mammalian physiology exam when I was pretty sure I failed it.
Okay, we'll take that. That is a positive.
It was a strong B.
It's a strong B. We'll take it.
Yes, we will.
Very proud of you. Anyone else? We'd like to get at least one more, something positive that has happened for you so far this semester, since the last time we talked. Doesn't have to be academic related if you don't want it to be. No, there has to be at least one thing that has gone positive. I'll call out somebody. All right, come on, Carol.
Hi, so something positive is that my brother, he's living with us again. He used to live in Madison, but since he got a new job, he's been living with us, and it's been really great having him back. It feels like we're united again. So that's something positive that's been happening.
Awesome, awesome. So we'll go ahead and get started tonight. What we'll do is we'll have our two guests give an intro to who they are, a little bit about their background, and then we'll go ahead and start with a few questions. And then I would like for you to use the Q&A feature, or you can use the raise your hand feature, and you can ask the question to our panelists yourself. So I'll probably, at worst, I'll do 2 setup questions, and then I'll come back to get your feedback and get your specific questions answered. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Alissa, if you don't mind starting off with an intro about who you are, and then the first question I'll ask will allow you to give a little bit more detail about that internship. But we'll just start off with an intro about who you are.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Alissa. My pronouns are she, her. I am from Lima, Ohio. So if you're not familiar, it's Northwest Ohio. And I'm a second year here studying at the Ohio State University. And I'm majoring in industrial and systems engineering with a minor in Spanish. And yeah, over this past summer, I interned with Eaton Corporation based in Cleveland as an environmental health and safety intern.
Awesome. And we have a lot in common. My first internship was Eaton many years ago. I won't say how many. So definitely nice to see that we've come full circle with you being an Eaton intern last year. So awesome. All right, Dr. De Jesus, if you can let us know who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Luis De Jesus. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. That's where I did my undergrad. I did my undergrad in the University of Puerto Rico at Calle. I got my bachelor's degree on sciences studies with concentration on chemistry. I then did a Ph.D. in material sciences / physical chemistry at Texas A&M University under the supervision of Professor Sabarji Banerjee. And then now I'm a postdoc, after PhD, you have the chance of working in industry or becoming a postdoc if you want more academic route under the supervision of Professor Tom Maluk at the University of Pennsylvania. And next year, I'll be starting my independent career as a professor in chemistry at the University of Buffalo. I've done several internships, summer internships. I've done work over the semester. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to having these conversations.
Awesome. Thank you all for those introductions. So let's go ahead and just go into the first question. Can you tell us about your first internship? And what was that internship? The duration of the internship, and just kind of what did a day in the life of that internship look like? And we'll start with Alissa on that one.
Okay, great. Yeah. So as I said, I interned with Eaton Corporation. And if you're not familiar with what Eaton is, it's basically like an electricity company. So they make generators and everything. So yeah, as an environmental health and safety intern, I was working a lot with I was actually assigned a few projects. I guess a day in a life is I would be on able for people to communicate with me through emails or through Teams messages from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. a typical schedule. And then through there, I also had other commitments that I would do in the evenings. But I would say that we're very flexible with me at times not being able to always be on for that full 8 hours. And yeah, so I would start my days off just basically, sometimes I would have meetings right at 8 a.m. I'm just checking in with like my bosses about how my projects are going. For instance, one of them, I was doing research on reverse water osmosis and kind of how to treat reject water to reduce Eaton's water waste. Um, and yeah, basically I would just check in and then I would do my research. And then if I had any questions about it, which I usually did, because my bosses, they used a lot of jargon. So in their emails, I wasn't familiar with, and then they also used a lot of acronyms too. So I would always ask them like, what does this mean? Or like, could you clarify this? So yeah, and then after I would like submit something, I would always ask for feedback. So I would do that like later in the day, or I would send them progress and ask them for feedback if I was on the right track, or anything to make sure that I was doing what they wanted. And then, yeah, that's all I have. Was there another question I missed or?
No, that was it. I guess, can you do me a favor then? And for those that do not know, can you explain a little bit more about what an environmental health and science, what that field is? I'm very familiar with it. And I know that a lot of STEM students do not know that they may be studying something and that actually could be a field that they can work in full time. So could you explain that field a little bit more? And how did you get into an environmental internship from an industrial engineering type of studies?
Sure. So I could just explain like kind of what I learned, what environmental health and safety was based on what I was working on. And overall, like one of the main projects I was working on was reducing greenhouse gas emissions, mainly from like the supply chain. That's kind of where my major came in. And like from there, like with the Paris Agreement and everything, it's really like harking down as like a whole like global thing. Like all countries are working together to now reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So this field is actually really like on the rise because of this, and big corporations are now really being asked to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And like other things that I've worked on other than greenhouse gas emissions would be like the zero waste to landfill, reducing waste, and also just trying to educate other employees about how what they are doing to contribute to reducing emissions and reducing waste. And how I got involved actually was through Deb. So Deb's here with us tonight, and I was actually at one of these meetings with the Lewis Stokes Midwest Regional Center, and we were talking about our goals and everything, and I just said I wanted to have a summer professional experience and I wanted help with that. And basically like through that little like networking, I was able to, she was able to introduce me to an Eaton worker who also works with the LSAMP. And just through that connection, I was able to work as an environmental health and safety intern. I was asked to be an intern because I'm also passionate about the environment and a humanitarian engineering scholar. So I have had some experience with working with like water management and water harvesting. So that's kind of how that played in. And yeah, even though my major is industrial systems engineering, I still found that I could work like in the environmental sector.
Awesome. Thanks for that feedback. And that was a wonderful plug for our for our LSMRCE activities and the purpose of this. For those that have been on these sessions, we've talked about upcoming internships and people choosing to apply and putting their name in the hat and saying what their desires are. And Alissa did it. right? She's a perfect example of a person who was right where you are and just chose to apply and put her, put her name in the hat. And so when Deb is sending out information about internships, about full-time employment, about scholarships, you have to put your name in the hat. We have more opportunities than students that apply. So I just want you to be encouraged and make sure you take advantage. So Alissa, thank you so much for sharing that. And same question for you, Dr. De Jesus. Can you talk about that first internship experience, and then just what did a day in the life of an intern look like? And what was that transition to from being a student to an intern? Maybe some of the challenges you faced doing that, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And I would like to, if I have the opportunity to add a little bit on that about like, if Deb is 17 information, you should definitely apply. So in Puerto Rico, at the University of Puerto Rico, there was this program, or there is this program, it's called the RISE program. So the RISE program is to furnish opportunities to undergraduate minorities both in the island of Puerto Rico and in the mainland US. And I remember that they had people coming from the US interviewing every week, and my name was in the sign up sheet of absolutely, I interviewed like with absolutely everyone. And I was a first year undergraduate with like very little experience in research, no experience in as an intern. And I just like went at it, and I was trying to show like, that I was like passionate, and show that I was like really into science, and which I am, right? I wasn't trying to show, I was like demonstrating that. And that got me my first opportunity. I did the work within the Research Institute of the City of Hope Hospital. This is in Duarte, California. So a person from the little island of Puerto Rico in the Caribbean flew all those hours directly to California. My English was not as good as my English is right now. So it was kind of like interesting to like be able to communicate with other individuals. But my idea of having this opportunity was like, I'm just exploring something different. When I started my chemistry degree, I wanted to be a pharmaceutical scientist. And I just wanted to explore this opportunity of what is to do research. So the day of our life during those days was literally walking in 100-degree weather, because it's California in the summer. So it was actually really like Puerto Rico, to the lab, conversing with my mentor, who was a senior research scientist. His name is Jerry. And we were just conversing and trying to figure out, okay, so what's a project for me? And we decided that we were going to go on organic chemistry route, developing this chemical to treat cancer cells. So my whole summer was very much reading papers, conversing about the sciences, and doing all these very intricate experiments and characterization techniques to be able to have a close to a good yield of product for this specific treatment chemical for cancer cells. So it was a lot of like conversation, a lot of like experiments that didn't work, but we then like within those conversations figure out what happened, and that really showed me that this path of sitting down and conversing about experiments and things that didn't work, and how can we actually make it work, and having hypotheses that are not confirmed, and then like turning around and seeing like, oh, but this actually means this other aspect. That actually really motivated me to change my career path completely. So I remember coming back from my this research opportunity back home, and tell my mom specifically, like, when I finish, I'm doing a PhD in the US. because it was literally like mind blowing how amazing it is to have these opportunities to think about this experiment, to have something that works, and how satisfying that is. And you know, I was, I guess, a little lucky in having a lab that, even though my English wasn't as developed at that point, I was able to communicate. They were patient with me while I was trying to learn the language. I remember at one time we were playing basketball with some of the grad students, and I hit someone in the jaw with the basket. It was a complete accident, not on purpose at all. But then, like, my pronunciation was like, "How is your jaw okay?" And they were like, "Wait, man, like, why are you saying it's like your jaw?" And he's like, "No, it's pronounced jaw." And it was like, at that moment you start learning, okay, actually this is how you communicate, right? Like, so this is how, like, you start learning. And it was an amazing experience that really, like I said, changed my career path, from being more pharmaceutical to being an academic professor. I think I answered all the questions.
Oh, great. That's absolutely great feedback. You answered that awesome. Because I think I started off with one question and it ended up with like 6 in there. So you did a really good job. I want to stay kind of in that vein of something that you said there towards the end. It kind of reshaped or had a pivot because of your first internship. I was in a similar situation where my first internship made me focus more on the manufacturing space and making the product instead of being an electrical engineer. I want to know from both of you, did that first internship, one, what was the original path you were on? Did the internship shift your paths? Or did it also solidify that you were going down the right path from the beginning? Because I do think that internships have a very powerful impact on your academic selection. And that's why the earlier you can do one, the better. So feel free to share your thoughts on that.
I can, Alissa, do you want to go first? I don't know.
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, so it really solidified, like, for me, that I did want to continue to specialize in supply chain management. And this was especially because now I know I can work like in the environmental sector, and I actually learned a lot about what else I could do. Since like every week, my mentor had me meet people who worked in areas that I was interested in. So I got to meet with people who were in ergonomics, who are in quality control, and also other industrial systems engineers, and see what they're doing and learn about their experiences and how they got there. And so I was learning about all these different career paths that I could choose, or other things that they got involved in that typically I wouldn't think of that I could do as an industrial systems engineer. So I would definitely say it made me learn more about my options, but it definitely solidified that I do want to work in supply chain management.
You bring up a really great point. For those who've never done an internship or preparing for that first one, or you've done an internship, you just didn't leverage it. An internship is going to blow your mind with how many different jobs exist. Many of us, we start our academic path and we think this is going to be the job I get. And then once you actually get out there, you realize there's so many jobs that you never heard of them. That's the whole point. Like, you literally don't know that this job even exists. And then you get into that internship and you get a chance to do the things, be exposed with the department or the organization you're in, but you get a chance to learn about everything. And that was, I thought, just one of the most beautiful experiences for myself, was just seeing how many different opportunities existed that I never knew about. So I'll pass it over to you, Dr. De Jesus, to share your feedback there.
Yeah, Thank you so much. So basically, like I mentioned, when I started my chemistry degree, I was thinking of considering pharmacy school. So that there's like some intrinsic differences between going to pharmacy school or going to graduate school, and it basically boils down to, you know, do you want to like go ahead into like more of a general question of science that you may answer, to how can you apply the chemistry or the biological sciences that you know into pharmacy, right? So with a PharmD, you can either work in a pharmaceutical company, or you can work as a, you know, as a person in a like a place like Walgreens or CVS or some kind of like pharmacies, like smaller pharmacy, or you can work as a consultant. So those are just like very couple of options for pharmacy, for PharmD, and that's what I was going to go. So when I went to my first internship, I noticed that there something that I didn't know because no one ever told me, or I didn't have the opportunity. But when I submerged myself within the research internship opportunity, and I saw, wait a second, hold up, these are fantastic opportunities, but there's also a gamut of options that you can do if in grad school, specifically, and more so in my particular case, there's this job of being a professor that really actually makes a lot of sense to me and really connected with me. And I don't think that I would have pivoted in that way if I wouldn't have that opportunity of doing research, specifically because you kind of have to be submerged in this idea of like what is, right? And this idea of like, you're gonna do an experiment one day, you're not gonna check it until the next day. If something goes wrong, what happened? Like what else can we do? And that kind of like planning and that kind of like direction on science was something that really like completely changed my way of seeing my career. And then so I decided that I would go to grad school and eventually work as a professor. So it's basically those kind of opportunities completely, for me, change my path. And not only that, so that first opportunity showed me that I wanted to be a professor. But then organic chemistry wasn't something that I felt necessarily that bonded to. So my second opportunity was not organic chemistry related, it was biochemistry related. And then my third opportunity was material science related. And it was on that third opportunity that I noticed that's what I want. And that's what I did my PhD on material sciences. So like having multiple opportunities that you can scope into what better serves you as an individual is very powerful. And I highly recommend, like, if you like research, that's awesome. Maybe try a second discipline just in case, see how you feel about that. If not, it's all good. Like, you still have the opportunity to move into other opportunities, other disciplines. And even when you finish grad school, if you don't want to be a professor, you want to be working in pharmacy again, that's completely fine, which is also one of the beauties of these research opportunities, that just gives you a bigger scope of the horizon in terms of your professional development. And I think that that's actually something that is fantastic. So as the more you participate on this, the better you get to know the world and know what is out there for yourself.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that feedback. We did have a question from the audience that I'd like to get both of your feedback on. So you're a college student, then you're going into this internship world. You know, how did you manage the stress of just the differences between, you know, going to class every day versus going to work every day? And what were some of the stressors in that environment that you either were prepared for or not prepared for?
Yeah, so yeah, over the summer, I could definitely say I was very stressed out just because of I had a packed schedule. And that transition from ending my first year to now working as an intern, I was definitely very nervous because I didn't know what to expect. Since I am like a first gen in my family, like I really couldn't ask them for advice because like no one in my family has ever done something like this. So um, so I can definitely understand feelings of nervousness because I was also nervous about the workload I would be receiving and if I would be able to like keep up with everything. But I, after getting into it, I actually found out I had nothing to worry about. Since luckily for me, I was very interested in what I was doing. So sometimes it really wouldn't feel like work for me. As weird as it might sound, but since I was actually thoroughly enjoying what I was doing and I had very great bosses, I really didn't feel like I was working. And when things did get hectic, because it did, what I would do is just like try to reach out to my friends and family to let them know how I was feeling, to like try to relieve some of the stress. Or I would just let them know, hands down, like how I was doing or like why like I'm feeling some certain way, just to like have crystal clear communication. So I'm not just putting on like a smile, but I'm really like struggling internally. So and other things I did was I just really, it helped me a lot when I planned out my days. So I would always know like when am I going to eat? Like when am I going to work on this? So I just wouldn't overbook myself or forget to like drink water throughout the day. Yes, I would schedule breaks to drink water because I was just so focused and into it. And really just like practicing self-care and making sure you are eating during the day and drinking your water throughout meetings and everything. But yeah, that's kind of what I did to handle my stress.
That's a great feedback, and it is true. You'll get into working and you'll forget food and water at times. It's actually easy to forget food and water because you just get so consumed into the day and the different things that you're doing. So great feedback. Dr. De Jesus, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Alissa, I completely relate with you in the related to the stress that comes being first gen. Like my family did not have absolutely any idea of what am I doing. I'm a postdoc. I stopped taking classes a long time ago, and my grandmother used to always ask me, "How are your grades doing?" You know, like it's you know, being the first gen and opening those doors for your family is also, it's a great stress. So I'm happy to hear that, you know, like it went well during your internship with all that. In my case, the expectations that come with that too. That was the one thing that was always in my mind, in the sense of like the expectations of what is the professor who is supervising you gonna think? What are the professors back in Puerto Rico going to think? Because it's not, it didn't become like, what is my family going to think? Because they couldn't necessarily relate, but it was more like, oh man, like this could be my future. And that thought was like very present during the first internship, during the second internship, during the third internship, during my whole grad school, during my postdoc. Is something that you have to learn, like to kind of like hug and understand that, you know, don't be dwelling on those expectations. Do the work that you can do, because you're brilliant, you're a fantastic person, you can think, and that will make you a superb scientist. I would also like to add, in my particular case, a stressful thing was language. Language barrier can be a thing, and it doesn't necessarily have to do between Spanish and English. There's a lot of like cultural backgrounds, differences, things that you have to be careful how to say it, when to say it, or you don't even know what they're saying necessarily because you don't have that cultural background. And that was quite stressful, but I learned that you just ask, can you repeat that again? Can you explain what you just said? I'm not sure. What are you saying? You know, like, please, can you repeat it one more time? And it's okay. Like, as long as like you're being cautious about it, it's completely fine. And one big stressful thing, just to finish, during my second internship, right before it started, or right before the second internship started, the University of Puerto Rico went into like a all-out strike due to the conditions that we were being handled by the government. And so there were a lot of classes that I couldn't finish during the normal semester. And so during the internship, I had to bring all my organic chemistry books, all my calculus books, to be able to study. In addition to all the work that I needed to do in lab, I needed to study. So when I would come back from the internship, I could finish all the exams and I could finish all the required work. And that was like crazy. That summer was completely crazy. But again, you know, you are here, you have a support group, you have mentors while you're doing the internship. So being able to get approach your mentors and talk to them and be like, this is happening, can you help me? That's also very important. And you are not the only one. I don't know how was your experience, Alissa, but like usually there was a cohort of around 10 or 11 students that were working at the same time in other labs, but we were all working at the same time. So you could like approach certain people that you could be friendly with and converse and be like, hey, this is happening. What do you think? And usually that's like also very helpful. So make sure that the point is like, make sure that if you are feeling all these stresses, be able to voice them with a mentor, with a friend, with a family, even if they don't understand, because voicing them is a way of like releasing them, and it really helps.
Awesome. Thanks for that feedback. You said something there about the languages, right? So when we talk about language, you may be thinking, you know, do I speak English? Do I speak French? Do I speak Spanish? And I really want you to understand when you intern, and it's just something that I want you to get your mind prepared for up front. And I think it'll help you cope with it during your internship. It's likely you're about to embark upon a whole new language. When you go into the workplace and the internship, they will be using acronyms and terms and things that you think mean completely something different. They're speaking English. It's just that they're speaking their industry's English. And so I remember what I would do was just write everything down that I didn't understand. And then I would just ask people to help give me clarity because I just did not know. I felt like I wasn't smart. I felt like people were just better than me. And then I just realized that it was only because I didn't know it. My ignorance was frustrating me, but you don't have to stay ignorant. Ignorance just means you don't know. And that's okay. We're always going to be ignorant of something in life. The thing is are you going to stay that way? And so that's the biggest piece, is to ensure that you don't choose to stay in that spot. So make sure that you get your questions answered. You should be asking tons of questions. And if people make you feel uncomfortable, that may be a sign of that's not the type of environment you want to be in or the company you want to work for. But I challenge you to feel free to make sure you get that clarity of language, because you have to be able to speak in the way in which that business or operation speaks. If anybody agree, has been through that, I'm hitting the mark there.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
would definitely say when my bosses would send me check-in emails or we would have meetings, I'm not gonna lie, there were some meetings where I sat in and I had no idea what was going on. And it was perfectly like they did not mind at all when I scheduled a follow-up meeting to discuss what happened to the previous one because they knew things were moving really fast. They were using jargon and acronyms that I had no idea what they meant. And yeah, they actually love, or at least my bosses, in my experience, they really loved like explaining what they meant because they're like, oh yeah, I forgot, like you're not like you just got here. But yeah, don't be scared to ask questions because they love that, and that means, you know, they can see that you're engaged and that you really care.
Great point. Great point. I like to open it up. Is there someone in the audience? Use your raise your hand feature. I like to hear your question, your comment, your feedback on the internship experience. Please use the raise your hand feature. And you can use the raise your hand feature before I call you out.
I think we have a question on the box from
All right.
anonymous attendee. Yeah.
Yep, we also have a hand raised as well. I'll start with the hand raised and then we'll go to the Q&A question. So Stephanie, please feel free to take your device off mute.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, awesome.
Okay, so I have a question for Louis. You had mentioned that your second internship was a little hectic. Is there anything that you could have done differently while working for that company? And how would you have approached it?
That's a great question. Looking back, I actually I really don't think in that particular case, because the hecticness of my second internship wasn't something that I could control. The University of Puerto Rico, we are fighters, and we believe in the equality for everyone in Puerto Rico, and we were trying to fight for the rights of many individuals. So we went on a strike, and that was the case, you know. And the consequence of that was that I had to juggle between the research and my studies to be able to complete the expectation of the task within the research, and in addition the expectation of the classes. I actually think, looking back, that was in preparation for what grad school looks like. So usually when you're doing STEM related fields, you have a year or 2 years of classes, but at the same time, you're joining a group, you're doing some level of research. You're also doing some level of teaching while taking classes, and being able to learn how to put into a calendar both of them was something that helped me when I actually went into grad school. So I now say that I welcome chaos, right? I welcome this kind of entropy, and my supervisors knew what was happening too. I was clear about it. This happened in Puerto Rico. I had no control of that. I'm gonna work with you, but you're gonna see me reading or practicing some calculus in your lab. That I'm just trying to be ready. And he understood, right? He was very supportive of that. So I think that the lesson here is that sometimes you don't have the control of everything, and that's okay. It's more of riding the wave, learning how to be able to do that and express yourself to your mentors, to your supervisors of whatever is happening. Because then you can work together in alleviating some of the stresses that may come with that. Because it's a very stressful moment when you have to be studying and at the same time working, but like there's there's expectations that were understood and met by me communicating it. That's a very good question, and my recommendation, in looking back, I think I learned a lot, and my recommendation from that is that please make sure that your supervisors, your mentors, your friends know what is happening, so like you can actually work through that chaos, that entropy within like this beautiful thing that we call life, because life happens, and that's it is what it is sometimes. I hope that I answered your question. If I didn't, I don't mind sharing more.
All right, thank you for the feedback. I'll read the question in the Q&A box. It says, how can you convert the internship experience into a full-time position? Are there rules you should follow to show you are motivated and qualified for a permanent job?
Yeah, I'll go first on this one. So basically, yeah, as a second year now, and having like an internship experience so early, I kind of put this idea on the back burner of like full-time employment, since I'm so far from like graduating. But it's actually very good to think about. And like kind of what I have been doing is just staying in contact with the boss I had, and just emailing her and just asking for overall feedback and how things have been going on the projects that I worked on, just to show that I'm still very interested, and that I want to maybe work again at Eden next summer. Certain rules that I should follow, I would just say definitely just stay engaged, always ask questions. Oh, and also if you do meet with other people, like meeting people within your interests, I would say definitely get their contact information. That's what I did with the people I met every week. I do have their contact information, and I just jotted down things that we discussed, because the people that you meet, they might have projects that they would want you to work on next summer, because they're always looking for help in internships, and if they like you, they would love to have you on board. So I would say I'm a very introverted person, and it made me nervous having to meet new people every week, especially because this is my first experience. So I guess rules or something you could do in order to prepare to meet all of these people for the first time is really practice your pitch and what you want people to know about you and your interests. That will show, that will get, matching names with faces, and for people to remember you and might want to reach out to you in the future, if you just let them know about you. And yeah, just try to be friendly and just go all at it. And they know we're all just learning, so don't feel like you have to know everything.
Alissa said absolutely everything that I would say. I just want to put out there that during my third internship, I met this one professor and I told him, I'm gonna work for you. And he told me, get accepted. And I did get accepted, and that's the person I graduated with. So everything Alissa said is completely perfect, because that's exactly what I did, and it worked. So yeah.
And I would say with the company that you're working with, everything that has been shared is perfect. When you're working that summer, letting people know when you graduate is important, because if they know, like if you're like, oh, I graduate in December, they're like, oh my gosh, I may need to make an offer fast because you're going to graduate in December. If you graduate 3 years from now, that might be a little different, but letting them know your expected graduation date is really cool. And then also staying connected with that person in general is awesome, because that person that you work directly for could switch companies, and they may be interested in bringing you to the other company as an intern. So just leverage that. Also, don't forget to put these things on your resume ASAP. Matter of fact, it should be on your resume. It should be on LinkedIn right now. If you're working an internship or co-op, as soon as you start, you put it on LinkedIn immediately. That is work experience. It's showcasing your professionalism. Get it on the resume. Just let people know what you're doing, because it's just, you want to get credit for that experience. There's value, and there's monetary value, because later in life, when you're looking for full-time employment, the more experience you have, the more you can leverage that experience into higher pay. So just wanted to share that piece too.
Yeah, can I
And-
add on
and-
to, oh, sorry. Sorry, I just want to add on to what Brian was saying. Me personally, I do have like a Google Doc. Just I wrote down all the projects I was working on and all of the new skills that I learned or enhanced, just so I'd be able to talk about that like in interviews, especially at career fairs when they're asking about my experience. So you have an ongoing list, so you have it and ready to go, so you don't have to like think about it.
And also, in addition to LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is quite important. Interestingly, Twitter has become a big deal as well in both companies and academics. Like all my professors are on Twitter, and it's not, I mean, it's a little weird, but it's not that bad, you know, like because most of the time what they're doing is showcasing their work and showcasing the kind of things that they're interested in. So it has become a very powerful tool to have an academic Twitter, which I have mine in my name because of that, because then you can connect people through social media, specifically this media, to meet even more individuals. I know a lot of editors of journals through Twitter. I know a lot of like possible collaborators of the future because of Twitter. So it's having both LinkedIn and Twitter right now. I think that is a great suggestion to expand your network of possible individuals that could give you a job.
Awesome feedback. We got about 6 minutes left. We'll go through and see if there's one more question. If not, I'll set up one question to wrap us up tonight. Is there anyone that'd like to do one more question? Please use your raise your hand feature if you like. All right. Well, what I like to do is, as we'll do a wrap up question. First off, I like to say thank you. Thank you to you both for your endurance through your academic career and your internships to be able to obtain the knowledge that was needed to share with our audience tonight. Audience, thank you for your participation. And I'd like to do a wrap up question tonight, which is, what would you do differently to make your first internship even more successful than it seems to have been now? So you seem like you guys managed through it, you got through it, it's been beneficial to you, but what could you have done in preparation to be even more prepared for that very first internship? And we'll end with that question from you both.
Yeah, for me personally, before my internship, I was supposed to have my pitch down, but I didn't. So it was I was still like learning about how to I was trying to perfect it. And it was funny because every time I met a new person, it would always be a different pitch. And I was like, I don't think I should do that anymore. So that's when I finally got it down. But I would say like also in preparation, like don't try to overbook yourself. And that was something I learned over the summer. Along with my internship, I was also doing part-time research and taking a calculus course. And I thought I would be able to juggle all of it at once. And I did, but I ended up getting very burnt out, especially since it was all virtual. So I would say just don't try to overpack your summers. There's always a next summer they're going to be looking for applicants, especially in research. So yeah, don't think you have to do everything in one summer. Like, you're able to stretch it out. And I wish I would have known that, because I think I would have gotten more out of my internship experience. Because sometimes I would have conflicts with my research or my calculus course during my internship. And yeah, so I just wish that's how I could have gotten more out of it if I would have opened up my schedule more.
I think, I mean, for our first internships, just make sure to, when I say lower your expectation, it's not like don't work hard, but like what I mean is like, make sure that you keep yourself grounded. This is a completely new experience. Things don't, usually internships last around 10 weeks. There's not necessarily a lot that you can do in 10 weeks, especially if it's your first experience, because you're learning new techniques, you're learning new language, you're learning, you're meeting new people, you're working in a completely different environment. So make sure that you feel that you ground yourself and you allow yourself to enjoy that opportunity at its natural state, without like thinking like I need to do more, because you, like Alissa said, you can definitely go into a burnout state really quickly. Just so you'll just allow yourself to enjoy and those techniques and to learn them well, because it's almost certain that your next internship you're going to be using exactly the same techniques. So make sure that whenever you're practicing them, you learn them well. So you can apply that kind of like skills throughout your whole career. So I would say that if I enjoy my first experience, but I think I would have enjoyed it even more if I would have kept myself grounded to being in the moment rather than like thinking ahead like 10 steps and trying to like just move as quick as I can because I only have 10 weeks. So that's my suggestion.
Awesome. That's really good feedback. And I really do like that. You know, it can be overwhelming. You could put a lot of pressure on yourself. You're excited, you're proud, your family's proud. It's just a lot of emotions that come with that first internship that you can put too much of a high expectation on yourself and forget to embrace the experience and just learn and explore and be inquisitive and just soak in what's happening. Yes, we still want to perform to the best of our abilities, but I really appreciate that, of not putting too much pressure on yourself, because it's already a tough situation. You don't want to make it any harder than it already may be. So really appreciate that feedback. Everyone, I appreciate your feedback tonight, your questions. There was one question about finances. I will say this, I've had that question asked to me twice in the last year about internships and money. I gave this advice, right? Know what your market will bear for an internship. But when you start, if you have a negotiation type conversation about money, just know that it's okay to negotiate, but know that they can say no. Typically, it doesn't lead to someone saying, we're not going to make you an offer. Because in a normal world of negotiation, an offer has been extended, and then you may have a negotiation discussion. From an internship, I have seen once where an intern, the offer was based off of what the salary was going to be. In that situation, you want to treat it like a full-time job and maybe do the research of what an intern may make in that area, in that particular field. But I will say this, and this is a tough one for me to say, because I never want someone's to get cut short on their money. I do want you to say that I want you to think about this. If it's a couple of dollars an hour or so difference between you wanting to accept this or not, just know that the internship is about the long-term investment, and you are not going to make enough money that summer that's going to buy all the things you need in life. And so, yes, make your money if it's a paid internship, but don't let the money get in the way of a wonderful opportunity, because that opportunity could pay even tenfold in the future. And the opportunity is worth more than just the money. And you're talking to somebody who, I needed every penny from my internship. I had no money. I didn't even have a car. I walked to work. So I was very poor, but I also understood the big picture, and I didn't allow the money to get in the way of my future. And I leveraged that experience. And I promise you, it's made me a whole lot more money than just what that summer money gave me that one time. I hope that helped give a little clarity to that very difficult question. And it is a very difficult question. So I commend you for asking it.
Yeah, and in some cases, even and I completely agree. Like they're not gonna give you less than that. What is I guess NSF, for example, has a this is what it is. But sometimes for summer internships for undergraduates, those rec letters, those are very powerful. So you're kind of also investing on, if you're doing industry, those connections, because those could be future employers. If you're doing more academic, those rec letters, or even that connection with the professor, that's going to give you possibly a job also in the future. So yeah, like it's a difficult question, I agree. But at the same time, think about the money and also think about the rec letters. So your job will speak about yourself.
All right. Well, thank you all. I looked at the chat box, looked like some really good feedback. I think this was a really good, detailed conversation. The honesty, the transparency from both of our panelists today, I think was extremely beneficial. We thank you so much. As you know, Deb probably didn't tell you, once you get speaking with us, you are now in the family, and she will be calling upon you many more times in the future. So please prepare for that. You guys did a wonderful job tonight. To the audience, thank you for sacrificing your time again. We wish you the best in your studies and all things first semester this year, and then be on standby. We have our conference coming up in October. We also have some more sessions planned for you. And as we said earlier, please check your email, your junk mail, your spam mail, and make sure that those LSMRCE emails that are coming out, that you read them, because Deb has wonderful opportunities. And she puts in the title of the email, she'll say summer opportunity, internship opportunity. So it's like, it's trying to even speak to you through the title of the emails. Don't overlook them, be seeking them. And I really want you to play offense. Stop playing defense with your life and with your career. If you are serious about getting an internship, serious about these scholarships, serious about getting into these grad schools, then you go demand it from your sponsors on campus. You tell them what you are seeking and what you are pursuing. And then when they position you, you go do your part. But we are an organization that's designed to help you, but we try to help as much as we can, but we also can't help in areas we can't see. So what we need from you is to tell us. And if you're aggressive with it, I promise you, you're going to find out that your sponsors on campus and also at the LSMRCE at the regional level, they want to help you. This is what gets us excited, is when we have a student that says, I need. The only thing I say back to that is, when we position you, You do your part and you bring it home. Sorry about the little motivation. I just get excited over your future. I get really excited about your future. All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. A wonderful session, and we will see you soon. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Really good feedback tonight.